I'm Katrina, 32 female. I live in a small but cozy apartment in the city, the kind with big windows that let in the morning light perfectly. For the past 5 years, I shared this space and my life with my partner, Mark, while building my career as a freelance graphic designer. Our life was a carefully curated picture of success and happiness until a diagnosis shattered the frame, revealing that the man I planned my future with saw me not as a partner, but as a liability. This is the story of how the worst moment of my life became the catalyst for my greatest triumph, and how I made the man who abandoned me in my darkest hour watch as I built an empire from the ashes of the life he torched. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Life before the diagnosis felt like a perfectly designed layout. Every element was in its place, balanced and aesthetically pleasing. Mark and I were the quintessential power couple, or so I thought. He was a rising star in software sales, all sharp suits, confident handshakes, and a smile that could close any deal. I was the creative force, the freelance graphic designer whose client list was growing steadily, allowing me the freedom to work from our light-filled apartment. We had a 5-year plan that included a house in the suburbs, a golden retriever, and maybe, just maybe, starting a family. Our future was a beautiful, high-resolution image, and I was its proud designer. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't a dramatic collapse or a sudden, terrifying event. It was subtle, like a pixel out of place that you can't unsee once you've noticed it. It started with a fatigue that was more than just end-of-the-week tiredness. It was a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. My hands, the tools of my trade, would ache and stiffen for no reason. I'd get dizzy spells that made the straight lines on my monitor swim and blur. I blamed it on stress, on too much screen time, on not eating right. I was 32. I was supposed to be in the prime of my life, not feeling like my body was slowly betraying me. Mark was supportive at first. He'd rub my shoulders, tell me I was working too hard, and bring home takeout so I wouldn't have to cook. "You just need a vacation, babe," he'd say, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Let's book that trip to Bali we've been talking about once my quarterly bonus comes in." It was his solution for everything: throw money and the promise of a luxury experience at it. But a vacation couldn't fix the persistent brain fog that made it hard to concentrate on complex design projects, or the random, searing pains that shot through my joints. My best friend, Sophia, an art teacher with a perceptive gaze and an endless supply of patience, was the first one to suggest it was something more. We were having coffee at our favorite spot, and I was trying to discreetly flex my fingers to ease the stiffness. "Trina," she said gently, her brow furrowed with concern. "This has been going on for months. Maybe you should see a specialist, not just your regular doctor, just to rule things out." I resisted. A specialist meant something was seriously wrong, and I wasn't ready to face that. Mark's support was already starting to feel thin, more like a performance than genuine care. His reassurances started to sound like platitudes, and his brow would furrow with impatience when I had to cancel our dinner plans because I was too exhausted to move from the couch. "Another headache?" he'd ask, the sympathy in his voice barely masking the annoyance. He saw my symptoms as inconveniences, temporary bugs in our perfectly running system. The tipping point came when I lost a major client. I'd missed a deadline because a particularly bad flare-up had left me barely able to see my computer screen. It was the first time my health had directly impacted my career, my independence. The shame and fear were suffocating. That night, I finally told Mark I had made an appointment with a rheumatologist. His reaction was not what I had hoped for. Instead of relief or concern, his face tightened. "A rheumatologist? Isn't that for old people with arthritis?" He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Katrina, are you sure you're not just being a little dramatic? We have the annual sales gala next month. I need you to be on your game. It's a huge networking opportunity for me." His words hit me like a splash of cold water. It wasn't about my health. It was about how my health affected him. My well-being was a line item in his life's business plan, and my symptoms were putting the project at risk. The perfect image we had built was starting to fray at the edges, and I was the unraveling thread. The weeks leading up to my appointment were tense. I tried to pretend everything was normal, pushing through the pain and fatigue to keep up with work and social commitments. I put on a brave face at dinners with Mark's colleagues, smiling until my jaw ached, all while my hands throbbed under the table. Mark seemed pleased, treating my recovery as a personal victory. "See, I told you you just needed to push through it," he said one night, oblivious to the fact that I was running on fumes, my body screaming in protest. The day of the appointment, I went alone. I told Mark I didn't want him to miss work, but the truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of him sitting there, tapping his foot impatiently, as a doctor described the intimate failures of my body. The rheumatologist was kind, thorough, and brutally honest. After a battery of tests and a long, detailed conversation about my symptoms, she gave me the diagnosis: fibromyalgia, a chronic condition characterized by widespread musculoskeletal pain, fatigue, and cognitive difficulties. She explained that it wasn't degenerative, but it was persistent. There would be good days and bad days. Management, not a cure, was the goal. She gave me pamphlets, prescriptions, and a referral to a support group. I walked out of the clinic in a daze, clutching the papers that had just redefined my entire life. The high-resolution image of my future was now a blurry, corrupted file. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time, the clinical white of the pamphlets stark against the dark interior. I had a name for my pain, but I had no idea that this diagnosis wouldn't just be a battle with my own body, but the event that would expose the hollow foundation of the life I had so carefully built. The unraveling had just begun. Holding the pamphlets from the doctor's office felt like holding a verdict. The clean, sans serif font spelling out fibromyalgia seemed to mock my own profession, a stark and clinical design for a messy and unpredictable future. I drove home on autopilot, my mind a chaotic swirl of medical jargon and rising panic. I needed to tell Mark. I needed my partner, the man I loved and trusted, to wrap his arms around me and tell me we would figure this out together. That's what partners did. That was the agreement, the unspoken vow under the sleek, modern roof of our shared life. I found him in the living room, loosening his tie as he looked over some sales reports on his tablet. The evening light cast long shadows across the floor, and for a moment, everything looked exactly as it always had. "Hey," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. He glanced up, his focus still on the screen. "Hey, babe, how was the appointment? Did they give you some vitamin C and send you on your way?" He was trying for levity, but it landed with a thud. I took a deep breath. "It's called fibromyalgia," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I tried to explain what the doctor had told me, that it was a chronic condition, that it explained the pain, the exhaustion, the brain fog. I talked about treatment plans, about lifestyle changes, about learning to manage my energy. I laid out the facts as calmly as I could, trying to present it as a problem we could solve, a new project we could tackle together. As I spoke, I watched his face change. The casual smile faded, replaced by a deep furrow in his brow. He put his tablet down, but he didn't move toward me. He just sat there, across the room, his expression shifting from confusion to a cold, hard calculation I had only ever seen him use on a difficult client. "Chronic," he repeated, the word tasting like something bitter in his mouth. "So, you're saying this. It doesn't go away." "It's manageable, Mark," I pleaded, my voice starting to crack. "There will be bad days, but there will be good days too." The doctor was very optimistic about. He cut me off, holding up a hand. "Let me get this straight. You're going to be sick, indefinitely. You're going to be tired, in pain, and foggy." He quoted my words back at me with a detached, analytical tone. The space between us in the living room suddenly felt like a chasm. "I'm still me, Mark," I whispered. He finally stood up, but not to come to me. He began to pace, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. "Katrina, we have a plan. The house, the promotion I'm up for, everything. It all depends on us being a team, a powerhouse. My career requires a certain amount of socializing, of hosting, of energy. I need a partner who can keep up, not someone I have to take care of. Each word was a physical blow. Take care of. The phrase echoed in the silent room, stripping away 5 years of love and partnership, reducing me to a burden, a faulty product, a bad investment. I can't do this, he said, finally stopping his pacing to look at me. There was no sadness in his eyes, no conflict, just a chilling resolve. I can't sign up for a lifetime of this. The uncertainty, the canceled plans, the weakness. It's not the life I want. I stared at him, my heart fracturing. This was the man who had held my hand in this very room and talked about growing old together. Now, he was looking at me as if I were a stranger, a problem he was efficiently and ruthlessly cutting from his life. So that's it? I asked, a wave of disbelief washing over the pain. 5 years and you're just walking away because I got sick. It's not that simple, he said, though his actions suggested it was exactly that simple. I have to think about my future, my happiness. I'm sorry, Katrina, I really am, but I just can't handle it. You can't handle it? The words were so absurd, so profoundly selfish, that a bitter laugh escaped my lips. I'm the one who has to handle it. I'm the one who has to live in this body every single day. All I asked was for you to hold my hand through it. But he was already shaking his head, his mind made up. He had run the numbers, assessed the risk, and decided to cut his losses. He retreated into our bedroom and began to pack a bag, his movements quick and efficient. Not a suitcase for a long trip, just an overnight bag, as if he were merely escaping an inconvenience and would reset at a hotel. He took his most expensive watch, a spare suit, and his laptop. The essentials. He paused at the door, bag in hand. He looked at me one last time, his expression unreadable. I'll have my assistant arrange to get the rest of my things, he said, his voice clipped and professional. You can stay here until you figure things out. I'll cover the rent for a couple of months. It was a severance package, a cold, transactional farewell. He didn't hug me. He didn't say he loved me one last time. He just turned and walked out the door, the click of the lock sounding like a gunshot in the silent apartment. I stood there for I don't know how long, frozen in the middle of the living room that was suddenly only half mine. The life we had built together had been dismantled in less than 10 minutes. He hadn't just left me. He had abandoned me. He had looked at my pain, my fear, my illness, and judged it to be an unworthy investment of his time and emotion. The man I loved was gone, and in his place was a ruthless salesman who had just discontinued a product line that was no longer profitable. I sank to the floor, the doctor's pamphlets scattered around me, and I finally broke. The unraveling was complete. All that was left were the wreckage and the deafening silence of a future that had vanished in an instant. The first few weeks after Mark left were a blur of gray. The beautiful, light-filled apartment that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a mausoleum, a monument to a dead relationship. Every object held a memory, every empty space echoed with his absence. His side of the closet was a hollow cavern. The indentation on his side of the bed was a constant, physical reminder of his departure. I moved through the days in a fog of grief and physical pain, the stress of the breakup triggering the worst fibromyalgia flare-up I had ever experienced. It felt like my body was mourning along with my heart, every joint and muscle screaming in protest. My work, my one remaining bastion of identity, suffered. I'd stare at my screen for hours, the vibrant colors and clean lines of my design projects feeling like a cruel joke in the face of my messy, colorless reality. I canceled projects, missed deadlines, and ignored emails. My carefully built freelance career was crumbling, and I lacked the energy to stop it. I was adrift in a sea of despair, and I was sinking fast. The person who threw me a lifeline was Sophia. She didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me to look on the bright side. She just showed up. She came over with bags of groceries, knowing I hadn't been eating properly. She didn't force me to talk. Instead, she'd put on a movie, make tea, and just sit with me in the quiet companionship that only a true friend can offer. She'd help me sort through bills and paperwork when my brain fog was too thick to decipher them myself. She was my anchor in the storm. One afternoon, as I was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm day, Sophia sat on the floor beside me. "I know you don't want to hear this right now, Trina," she said softly, "but he did you a favor." I just looked at her, my eyes welling up with tears. "No, listen," she insisted, her voice firm but kind. "He showed you who he really is. Imagine if you had married him. Imagine if you'd had kids and then this happened. He showed you his true colors now, before you wasted another 5 years on a man who values his stock portfolio more than his partner's well-being." She was right, of course. A cold, hard part of my brain knew she was right, but my heart was still too shattered to accept it. It was Sophia who found the pamphlet the rheumatologist had given me, crumpled under a stack of mail. It was for a local chronic illness support group. "You should go," she said, smoothing it out. "And the coffee table." "No," I said immediately. "I don't want to sit in a circle and complain. I'm not one of them." The words tasted ugly as soon as I said them. I was ashamed of my own prejudice, a reflection of the same ableism Mark had shown me. Sophia didn't push. She just left the pamphlet on the table. For a week, I ignored it, but the loneliness was a physical weight, and the 4 walls of my apartment were closing in. One Tuesday evening, driven by a desperation I couldn't ignore any longer, I found myself standing outside a community center, my heart pounding with anxiety. I almost turned around a dozen times. Pushing the door open, I found not a depressing, sterile room, but a warm, cozy space with mismatched armchairs and the smell of coffee. A group of people, ranging in age from their 20s to their 70s, were chatting and laughing. It wasn't the grim, somber scene I had imagined. A woman with vibrant silver hair and a warm, genuine smile approached me. "You must be new," she said, her eyes kind. "I'm a leaner. Welcome." This was my introduction to a leaner, the 60-year-old owner of a renowned artisanal bakery downtown. She moderated the group with a gentle authority and a sharp wit. Over the next hour, I didn't say much. I just listened. I listened to a young man talk about navigating college with Crohn's disease. I listened to a woman describe the challenges of being a mother with lupus. I listened to them share tips, frustrations, and small, hard-won victories. For the first time since my diagnosis, I wasn't alone. These people understood. They knew the language of chronic pain, of fatigue, of brain fog. They didn't offer pity, they offered solidarity. They talked about their lives not as tragedies, but as complex narratives they were actively writing. After the meeting, a leaner sought me out. "It's tough, that first step," she said, handing me a cup of tea. "The world isn't built for people like us. We have to build our own spaces." I found myself opening up to her, the whole sordid story of my diagnosis and Mark's departure spilling out. She listened patiently, nodding in understanding. "My husband did the same thing when I was diagnosed with MS 30 years ago," she said matter-of-factly. There was no bitterness in her voice, only a calm acceptance. "Some people are only built for the good weather. They run at the first sign of a storm. Let them run." Then she told me about her bakery. She had started it after her diagnosis, after she had to leave her high-stress corporate job. "I needed something I could control," she explained. "Something where I could set my own hours, work at my own pace. Baking is precise, but it's also creative. It saved me." As I walked home that night, something shifted inside me. The all-consuming grief for Mark and the life I had lost was still there, but it was no longer the only thing. A tiny spark had been lit in the darkness. It was the glimmer of an idea, a possibility. Eleanor's story resonated with me deeply. She had taken the constraints of her illness and used them to build something new, something that was entirely her own. She hadn't just survived, she had thrived. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. I was still in the wreckage of my old life, but for the first time, I could see a path forward. It wasn't the path I had planned, but it was a path. And as I looked at my own hands, aching but capable, I began to wonder. What could I build? What could I create, not in spite of my illness, but because of it? The idea was terrifying, but it was also thrilling. It was a glimmer of light in the ruins. The idea that sparked in the support group meeting with a leaner didn't explode into a bonfire overnight. It was a slow burn, an ember I had to carefully nurture. The core of a leaner's wisdom was about control, reclaiming agency when your own body feels like an unpredictable adversary. She had done it with her bakery. I was a graphic designer. My tools were color palettes, typography, and software, not flour and yeast. How could I apply that same principle to my life? The answer came from my own frustration. In the months following my diagnosis, I had searched online for resources, planners, apps, journals, designed for people managing chronic illnesses. What I found was a landscape of cold, clinical-looking tools. They were sterile, depressing, and overwhelmingly medical. They focused on tracking symptoms, medication schedules, and doctor's appointments. They were designed to manage a disease, not to help a person live a life. They felt like they were created by people who had read a textbook about chronic illness, not by people who actually lived with it. There was no beauty, no inspiration, no acknowledgement of the human being behind the diagnosis. That was my aha moment. This was a gap in the market, a need I was uniquely qualified to fill. I wasn't just a graphic designer, I was now a graphic designer with fibromyalgia. I had the skills to create beautiful, functional products and the lived experience to know exactly what was missing. My illness wasn't just a liability, it could be my greatest asset. I started small, sketching in a notebook during my better hours. My first project was a digital wellness planner, specifically for people with chronic conditions. It wouldn't just have sections for symptoms and meds. It would have pages for spoon tracking, a concept from spoon theory, well known in the chronic illness community, goal setting for low-energy days, gratitude logs, and gentle movement trackers. And most importantly, it would be beautiful. It would use calming color palettes, elegant typography, and inspiring artwork. It would be a tool that felt like an act of self-care, not a chore. I poured all my energy into it. On days when the pain was bad, I'd work from my bed, propped up with pillows. On days when my brain fog was thick, I'd focus on simple, repetitive design tasks. I started waking up with a sense of purpose again. The apartment that had felt like a prison was now my studio, my headquarters. Sophia was my biggest cheerleader. She would come over and I'd excitedly show her my latest designs. "Trina, this is incredible," she said, looking over a layout for a monthly planner. "It's not just a product, it's a lifeline. People need this." Her belief in me was the fuel that kept my ember glowing. Eleanor became my unofficial business mentor. I'd visit her bakery once a week, and over coffee and croissants, I'd pick her brain. She gave me practical advice about starting a small business, from setting up an LLC to marketing on a shoestring budget. "Start with an online shop," she advised. "Low overhead. Build a community, not just a customer base. Your story is your brand." Following her advice, I started an Instagram account. I didn't just post product mock-ups. I wrote honestly about my journey with fibromyalgia. I shared my struggles, my small victories, and my design process. I used hashtags relevant to the chronic illness community, and slowly people started to find me. The comments started pouring in. "I've been looking for something like this for years. Thank you for making something beautiful for us. Your story is my story." I was connecting with my people. I was building my community. The financial side was daunting. Mark's 2 months of severance, rent had run out, and my savings were dwindling. The pressure was immense. There were days when doubt crept in, whispering that I was crazy, that I would fail and end up broke and alone. On those days, I'd read the comments on my posts or a supportive text from Sophia, and I'd refocus. The next step was to turn my digital designs into physical products. I researched printers, paper stocks, and binding options. I wanted everything to be perfect, high quality, and a joy to hold. I used a small loan from a local credit union, along with the last of my savings, to fund my first small print run of a few hundred planners. The day the boxes of planners arrived at my apartment was terrifying and exhilarating. I stacked them in my living room, the sheer physical volume of my dream made real. They were beautiful, even better than I had imagined. That night, I launched my online store. I posted about it on Instagram, my hands shaking as I hit publish. I didn't expect much. A few sales from my small community of followers, maybe. I went to bed feeling a mix of hope and dread. I woke up the next morning, my body stiff and aching as usual, and picked up my phone. My screen was flooded with notifications. I had over 100 orders. A popular blogger in the chronic illness community had seen my launch post and shared it with her massive following. I stared at my phone, my eyes filling with tears. They were tears of relief, of joy, of overwhelming gratitude. It was working. My blueprint, sketched out in pain and uncertainty, was becoming a tangible structure. I had laid the foundation for a new life, a life I was building myself on my own terms. It was a life where my illness was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new, more meaningful chapter. The wreckage of my past was becoming the foundation of my future. The initial success of the online store was like a powerful dose of medicine. It didn't cure my fibromyalgia, but it soothed the deep, aching wounds of self-doubt and fear. The flood of orders was validating, but it was the messages that accompanied them that truly transformed me. People sent long emails detailing their own struggles with chronic illness, telling me how my planners made them feel seen and understood. I wasn't just selling a product, I was offering a tool for empowerment. This realization solidified my mission and fueled my determination. The business, which I named the Juniper Plan, after the resilient juniper tree that can thrive in harsh conditions, became my everything. The first few months were a whirlwind of active. IT managed from my small apartment. My living room became a shipping center, filled with boxes, packing tape, and stacks of planners. I learned to work around my body's limitations. I broke down tasks into small, manageable chunks. If I only had enough energy to pack 5 orders, I would pack 5 orders and celebrate it as a victory. I stopped fighting my body and started working with it. This synergy became the core philosophy of my brand. Sophia would come over after work to help me pack orders, her cheerful presence a constant source of support. We'd form an assembly line on my living room floor, fueled by pizza and determination. "You know," she said one evening, taping up a box, "you're actually building an empire from your couch. It's kind of iconic." We both laughed, but she was right. I was turning my biggest perceived weakness, my need to be home, to rest, to work at an unconventional pace, into the unique strength of my business. As the Juniper Plan grew, I knew I couldn't do it all myself. I needed help, but the thought of hiring employees and managing a traditional office was overwhelming. Again, I turned to the principles I was learning from my own life. Why couldn't I build a company that operated on the same values of flexibility and accommodation that my products promoted? I decided to hire a small, entirely remote team. My first hire was a virtual assistant to handle customer service, a woman from another state who also lived with a chronic illness and needed flexible, work-from-home employment. My second hire was a part-time social media manager, a young man with Crohn's disease who understood my audience instinctively. We built a team of talented individuals who were often overlooked by the traditional workforce because of their health conditions. We communicated via Slack and Zoom, and our company culture was built on mutual understanding and a shared mission. We weren't just colleagues, we were a community. The product line expanded. Based on customer feedback, I designed specialized journals for tracking medication side effects, symptom-friendly recipe cards, and beautiful, ergonomic pens that were easier for aching hands to hold. Each new product was born from a genuine need within my community. I also started a blog and a newsletter, sharing practical tips for living with chronic illness, featuring stories from my customers, and advocating for disability awareness. The Juniper Plan was becoming more than just an e-commerce store. It was becoming a trusted resource and a safe space. About a year and a half after I launched, a major lifestyle magazine reached out, wanting to feature me and the Juniper Plan in an article about entrepreneurs changing the wellness industry. I was floored. This was the kind of mainstream recognition I had never dreamed of. The interview was conducted over Zoom, the journalist fascinated by my story and the business model I had built. I spoke openly about my diagnosis, about Mark's abandonment, and about how hitting rock bottom had forced me to build a new life from scratch. I didn't do it for revenge, I did it to be honest about the journey. The article was published a few weeks later. The response was explosive. Orders surged, my social media following skyrocketed, and my inbox was flooded with messages of support from all over the world. But the most significant consequence of the article was an email that landed in my inbox a few days later. It was from a buyer at Aura, one of the largest and most stylish retail chains in the country, known for its curated selection of home goods, stationery, and wellness products. They wanted to discuss a potential partnership to carry the Juniper Plan products in their stores nationwide. Reading that email, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment that was so deep it almost hurt. This was the big league. This was the kind of deal that could transform my small, apartment-based business into a national brand. This was the masterpiece I had been weaving, thread by painful, deliberate thread. The meeting was set for the following month at Aura's corporate headquarters downtown. As I prepared my presentation, creating mock-ups of retail displays and compiling my sales data, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't the same woman who had crumpled to the floor in despair less than 2 years ago. I was a business owner, a community leader, an advocate. I had built a company that was not only successful, but also meaningful. Sophia helped me pick out an outfit for the meeting, a chic but comfortable jumpsuit in a deep juniper green. "You're going to walk in there and blow them away," she said, giving me a fierce hug. "Not just with your products, but with you." Walking towards the sleek glass skyscraper that housed Aura's headquarters, I thought about Mark. I wondered what he would think if he could see me now. The thought wasn't filled with the anger or hurt that it once would have been. Instead, it was a distant most clinical curiosity. He was a chapter from a previous book, a character who had played his part and exited the stage. The story was mine now, and I was about to write the most exciting chapter yet. The confrontation I was walking toward wasn't with him, but with the incredible, terrifying, wonderful future he had inadvertently set in motion. The Aura headquarters was the epitome of corporate chic. Polished concrete floors, minimalist furniture, and a quiet, efficient hum filled the air. It was the kind of place Mark would have loved, a temple dedicated to success and aesthetic perfection. As I was led into a large, glass-walled boardroom, I felt a flicker of the old Katrina's insecurity, the one who felt she had to perform and keep up. But then I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and remembered I wasn't there to keep up with anyone. I was there because I had built something they wanted. The meeting was with 2 senior buyers and the vice president of merchandising. They were professional, sharp, and initially a little intimidating. But as I began my presentation, my confidence grew. I didn't just talk about sales figures and profit margins. I told my story. I talked about my diagnosis, the gap in the market, and the community I had built. I showed them the products, letting the quality and thoughtful design speak for themselves. I explained the philosophy behind the Juniper Plan, that living with a chronic illness doesn't mean your life has to be devoid of beauty and inspiration. They were captivated. They asked insightful questions, not just about the business, but about the community and the mission. By the end of the meeting, the VP of merchandising, a woman named Ms. Chen, smiled at me. "Katrina," she said, "this is more than just a product line. It's a movement. We don't just want to stock your planners, we want to partner with you. We'd like to offer you an exclusive deal to feature the Juniper Plan in a dedicated section in all 200 of our stores, complete with in-store displays and a major marketing campaign." The offer was staggering, far beyond my wildest expectations. We spent another hour hashing out the details. It was a life-changing deal. As we were wrapping up, Ms. Chen mentioned, "Our financial team will need to do their due diligence, of course. We work with an external firm for our major partnership acquisitions. They're the best in the business, Veridian Financial Group." The name didn't register at first. I was too high on the success of the meeting. I shook their hands, thanked them profusely, and walked out of the boardroom feeling like I was floating. I immediately called Sophia from the lobby, and we screamed with joy over the phone. The name finally hit me later that night as I was reviewing my notes. Veridian Financial Group. A cold dread washed over me. That was Mark's firm. He hadn't just worked there, he had been a rising star. When he left me, he had been on the shortlist for a junior partner position. My heart pounded in my chest. Of all the financial firms in the city, it had to be his. There was a very real possibility that Mark, the man who told me he couldn't handle my illness because it would interfere with his career, would be directly involved in the financial review of the company I built because of that very illness. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. For a moment, I panicked. Should I back out? Should I tell Aura I couldn't work with that firm? But then a different feeling replaced the panic, a cold, hard resolve. No, I would not let him have that power over me. I had built this company from nothing. It was strong, profitable, and legitimate. I had nothing to hide. If he was on the team, he would see in black and white the success I had built not just without him, but because of him. My success would be delivered to him as a financial report. This wasn't the dramatic, tearful confrontation I might have once imagined. This was something far more potent. It was a quiet, professional unveiling of his colossal miscalculation. 2 weeks later, I was CC'd on an introductory email to schedule the financial review. And there it was, at the bottom of the list of the Veridian team members. Mark Peterson, junior partner. He had gotten his promotion. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to remain calm. The day of the final review meeting was held back in the Aura boardroom. I was there with Ms. Chen to answer any final questions. Mark and 2 of his colleagues walked in. He saw me immediately. The color drained from his face. His professional, confident smile faltered, replaced by a look of utter shock and disbelief. He looked at me, then at the Juniper Plan portfolio in front of him, then back at me, the pieces clicking into place in his mind. He tried to recover, to put on his slick, professional mask, but his composure was shattered. He barely spoke during the meeting, his eyes repeatedly flicking towards me with a bewildered express. Sion, his colleague, a senior partner, led the presentation. The report was glowing. They praised my business model, my profit margins, my growth potential. This is one of the most promising and well-managed startups we've reviewed this year, the senior partner said, looking directly at Ms. Chen. The founder has built an incredibly strong and loyal customer base. It's a brilliant venture. Through it all, I remained calm and professional. I answered their questions clearly and confidently. I never once made eye contact with Mark. I acted as if he were just another consultant in the room, a stranger. My indifference was, I realized, more powerful than any angry words could ever be. I was not the broken woman he had left behind. I was the founder of a brilliant venture. At the end of the meeting, Ms. Chen stood up and shook my hand warmly. "Welcome to the Aura family, Katrina. We are so thrilled to have you." As people started to pack up their briefcases, Mark lingered. He approached me tentatively after Ms. Chen had walked away. "Katrina," he started, his voice strained. I had no idea." I finally looked at him, my expression neutral. "Why would you have?" "This is incredible," he stammered, gesturing vaguely at the room. "What you've built." "Yes, it is," I said simply. There was no malice in my voice, only fact. He looked uncomfortable, searching for words. "Listen, the way things ended, I was a fool. I made a terrible mistake." I offered him a small, tight smile. It held no warmth. "No, you didn't," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You made a choice. You chose the life you wanted. And you inadvertently gave me the freedom to build the life I wanted. So, in a way, I should thank you." I picked up my portfolio. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a national brand to launch." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the boardroom. There was no screaming match, no dramatic scene. There was just the quiet, undeniable truth of my success. The unveiling was complete. He hadn't just seen what I had built. He had been forced to professionally validate and quantify the success of the woman he had written off as a liability. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that was the most devastating confrontation of all. The 6 months following the deal with Aura were the most intense and rewarding of my life. The launch of the Juniper plan in their stores was a massive success. The marketing campaign featured my story prominently, and it resonated with millions of people, not just those with chronic illnesses, but anyone who had ever had to rebuild their life after a setback. My planners and journals sold out in the first month. We had to rush a new production order, 10 times the size of my first one. My life transformed. I was finally able to hire a full-time remote team, offering competitive salaries and benefits to people who, like me, were often marginalized by the traditional workforce. We became known as a progressive and compassionate employer. I moved out of the apartment I had once shared with Mark and bought a beautiful townhouse with a small garden and a dedicated office filled with natural light. It was my space, bought and paid for with the proceeds of my own hard work. Sophia and I celebrated the launch at a fancy restaurant I never would have been able to afford before. Raising a glass of champagne, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I am so unbelievably proud of you, Trina," she said. "You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into this." Even Alina was amazed at the scale of my success. I made a large donation to the community center that hosted our support group, ensuring they could continue their work for years to come. I still attended meetings whenever I could, not as someone who was drowning, but as someone who had learned to navigate the currents. My story became a source of hope for new members. One afternoon, about a year after the launch, I received a letter. It was forwarded from my old address. The handwriting was Mark's. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it in my sunny new kitchen, a mug of herbal tea in my hand. It was a long, rambling letter. He wrote about how seeing me in that boardroom had been a wake-up call. He said he had been promoted to full partner at his firm, achieving the goal he had been chasing for years, only to find it felt hollow. He wrote that all his success felt meaningless and that he realized he had thrown away the only real thing in his life. He apologized for his cowardice, his cruelty, his selfishness. He ended the letter by asking if I would be willing to meet him for coffee, to talk. I read the letter twice. The Katrina of 3 years ago would have felt a surge of triumphant vindication. She would have savored the image of him, alone and full of regret. But I wasn't that Katrina anymore. I felt a faint, distant pity foe. Him, but nothing more. His apology was for him, not for me. He was trying to alleviate his own guilt. I thought about what I had gained since he left. I had a thriving business that helped people every single day. I had a team that I respected and cared for. I had financial independence. I had a strong, supportive friendship with Sophia and a beautiful mentorship with Alina. And most importantly, I had a relationship with myself that was built on resilience and self-respect. I had learned to be my own partner, to manage my illness with grace, and to build a life that accommodated my needs without sacrificing my ambitions. My life was full. There was simply no room in it for him. The void he had left had been filled with so much more than he had ever occupied. I took the letter, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my shredder. I didn't need to respond. My silence was its own answer. My success was my answer. My happiness was my answer. Later that day, I was working on a new product design, a gratitude journal specifically for caregivers of people with chronic illness, an idea that had come from Sophia. My fibromyalgia was still a part of my daily life. I still had days of pain and fatigue, but it no longer defined me. It was a parameter, a fact of my existence, but it was not the whole story. I looked out my office window at my small, peaceful garden. The view from where I stood was beautiful. It wasn't the life I had meticulously planned with Mark all those years ago. It was something different. It was messier, more challenging, but infinitely more real and far more rewarding. It was a life I had designed myself from the wreckage up. And as I turned back to my work, a quiet smile on my face, I knew this was just the beginning. The summit I had reached wasn't an endpoint. It was a vantage point, showing me all the new, beautiful possibilities stretching out on the horizon.